Hey everybody, welcome back to City Skylines 2 and welcome back to St. Luke. This video, even though it's been taking a few months to come out after the last one, is actually kind of rushed, I'm gonna be very honest. I've been working on this for a long time, but lately, and I don't know if this is related to something in the game, I have heard some stories about bugs when it comes to demand, but lately I haven't been able to finish this because the demand for industry and offices is just absolutely ruining my map at the moment. And there's just something about how much residential areas I wanted to have at certain densities that just doesn't work out. So whether it's because of a bug, because I have heard some stuff about that, or just because I haven't been able to balance my stuff out correctly, I just haven't been able to finish St. Luke to the point where I would like it to be for this episode. My original ambition was to finish it and just finish the whole map around the city and maybe have some later episode where I did something completely new somewhere else, but I just haven't been able to do that. That said, the episode was already going on for way too long, so I have a lot of footage and also a lot of stuff that I didn't record. So in the end, I think it's good to at least cut back the ambition a little bit and just release this episode as is, with the focus on the areas to the north of the big city of St. Luke. And that's basically what we're working on here. In this part of the map, it's a little bit more hilly, which is a lot of fun to work with, actually. It's really cool to see just how useful the height lines are as well, and just meandering some roads around that to make sure that the roads have a realistic path that they would historically kind of organically grow into. So you have some roads winding between the valleys and stuff like that. And then here at the edge of the hills, there's a small village with its own rail station that's hooking up to here from St. Luke, where I think the rail line is also taking its most historically realistic, probably, way across these hills as well. So it's all coming together in a way that I feel is very natural, maybe even more natural than a lot of the parts of the area that I've been doing so far. So that's really fun. Also trying to come up with what stuff to do with these hills. I'm mostly going to keep them bare, taking a lot of inspiration from especially North England and Scotland in terms of, looking at Google Maps and seeing what kind of structures do we have here. I found some pathways and little footpaths above hills and just kind of running along the tops of different ranges. So that's something that I'm trying out here as well. And then you also have this combination of infrastructure with the main road leading into this part of the map, going alongside the rail line and hooking up to the different roads connecting to the town itself. I don't know why, but I find it very fun to work on these kind of sort of not quite highways, but slightly higher capacity than normal kind of roads. For the places where, there aren't a lot of big cities and there's not a whole lot of population density, but you still need some roads for trucks and just moving from one part of the country to another. And it's really fun to come up with very simple ways that are very cheap, with maybe just one bridge or a roundabout, to still manage to get that throughput. So over here to the north of the town, we have this road that is clearly not really part of any historical road network that hooks up to this connecting road with a roundabout and a flyover, to at least avoid having to have all of the traffic bump into each other at some point. When it comes to designing intersections at a high volume, it's all about reducing the amount of contact points between different vehicles going into all kinds of directions. And then here in the middle of the town, we have this roundabout with these two slip lanes, which I think makes sense for this kind of area as well. And it's also where the highway sort of stops, because this was a one-lane highway pretty much with separate on and off ramps, but we're now just getting into this roundabout situation because I figure at this point we don't have that much traffic on this road anymore. All of those highway on and off ramps are mostly to serve the suburbs of the big city, but at this point we're really going out of the big city, so we're probably fine by just sticking with this. And then around the town, we still have lots of farm fields as well, which is the usual kind of thing. Still pretty happy with that trick of using forestry to get at least soil with a slightly different texture. really fun to play with. And overall, I'm very glad with how the farm fields are working out. You can really tell that the more you zoom out, the more you start seeing how much it makes a difference in terms of how realistic the entire map looks from above. So that's pretty nice. Now for the town itself, I'm just going for a very organic random layout. Not exactly sure how this would have formed over time, but I think in terms of the location at the foot of these hills, I think it kind of makes sense. And obviously it hasn't grown that much in the last couple decades, so it's just a bunch of random roads and then maybe a little bit of ribbon development around the roads leading up to it, which I think is always something, at least in the UK you see this very often. It's always something that helps to make your towns and cities realistic. I don't think I've talked about this in the previous episodes, but you typically find a lot of ribbon development leading up to towns and cities. This goes for almost any place in the world, but there are some places where you can see differences. So like in the Netherlands in the 20th century, ribbon development pretty much stopped happening at some point. And then you see that all of the ribbon development that did exist are now just old houses, and they have all these new developments around them. But in the UK you can still find a lot of it leading up to cities, and typical ribbon development is when you have these roads leading into towns and cities that just have all of these houses next to them, and behind the houses it's just fields. It's just that historically these are the kind of roads where it's useful to have your house built along them. It just tends to create a very scattered urban landscape if it happens too much, and if you want to see what too much ribbon development looks like, you just need to look at the Flanders region in Belgium, which is always kind of, I don't know, people in the Netherlands make a lot of jokes about it and how horrible it looks and the roads are and everything. But a large part of that is just due to historically how much ribbon development it's gotten over time, which also means that you have a very large road to house ratio. You have more roads per house than you would have in the Netherlands on average, I believe. So you also have to spread out your budget a little bit more as well. That's not to say that's an excuse. I think the core issue here is poor urban planning, but it is, it's nuanced, as everything is. Oh, one thing I forgot to say is that just outside the town, I figured it would be nice to have a little commercial area with some small warehouses and offices and whatnot, which is kind of, looking at this, it feels a little bit like something you see in a lot of Dutch cities, but you also find these patches of random industrial zones across the UK as well. At least from my Google Mapsing, I've seen it a lot. It just tends to be a little bit more organic in shape than what I've built here, I suppose. And then over here we have all of these trees in the middle. I'm shaping out most of the tree lines just to separate farm fields, but also adding some larger forest sections here and there. And realistically, this isn't something that is actually happening in the game, but realistically I think you find these in real life mostly alongside small creeks and rivers that just kind of make their way through the landscape. So you never really have just clean farm fields. There are always some kind of natural elements going through it, and very often that is creeks or other reasons to have a forest. So making your agricultural area too clean, I think, is a mistake that you very quickly end up making. So I don't know. I always try to remind myself to make it look natural by adding some things that aren't farms in the middle of it, and adding some natural obstacles or barriers or stuff like that to make it look a bit more realistic. Also, nowadays, you would typically find these kind of features also designed into urban landscapes to make sure that you have basically animal highways where animals can still travel their way across the landscape, because in the end, wild animals still exist. And something very interesting I recently learned is that hedges are apparently super good at promoting biodiversity and allowing animals and different generations of animals to travel across landscapes. And that just kind of made me think about the UK as well. It's something that I haven't added into this map because we don't really have hedges that work very well. But in the UK, you find a lot of hedges everywhere in a rural landscape, which I figure actually is pretty good for biodiversity, probably. So good on them, honestly. It's something that I recently saw a video about, possibly adding something like that to the Netherlands. I think the rural landscape, in especially the Holland sections of the Netherlands, where it's all just grass, is not very good for biodiversity. But that's maybe getting into a slightly political topic. But very often Dutch people see it as nature, pretty much, or at least something very green. But you can find more biodiversity in other spaces, sometimes even urban spaces, just because having a lot of grass around isn't very good for biodiversity. Also, apparently the grass that we have in the Netherlands is actually English grass that was imported to the Netherlands at some point in time. The landscape here is really not the way that it realistically is naturally. It's basically all man-made, obviously, but that's still interesting to always keep in mind. Now, up until this time, I still haven't talked about why I'm actually finishing this video at this point in a state slightly more unfinished than I was looking for. Well, obviously it has something to do with the fact that there's some new stuff coming up for City Skylines 2. So I'm not going to talk too much about that in this video. There's gonna be some future stuff to showcase everything that's new, which is very exciting. I'm very happy about that. But that's also the reason that I quickly wanted to finish this. Also, I was thinking, when all of this new stuff is in the game, I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to continue with this series or do a new build, and if I still want to continue finishing this series. So if you have any thoughts about that as well, let me know in the comment section. Anything about mods or the new DLC and how it could maybe play a role in this map, or if I should just try something new. I'm not entirely sure yet. Even with the new stuff, there's not yet quite enough to do a complete Dutch build, which I would like to do at some point in the future. So I'm still kind of thinking about it as well. Not really sure what I'm going to do yet. But it's fun to try out, and it kind of forced me to finish this video. So I can also move on to some other stuff, perhaps. So now I'm moving to this part of the map, where I'm adding some small towns to make sure this section is also finished. And the forest with the university is so huge that it's basically the end of the city as well. These are just some small satellite towns, but it's not really a continuation of the big city itself. So some random little bits and bobs here and there, really. I already forgot if I actually gave these little villages names or not. We'll see at some point, I guess, but I don't think I have yet. Let me actually check. Oh, I did give them names. I have the game open in another screen. Huh, that's pretty good. So we'll get to that at some point later. For now, I just wanted to finish this university section in this big forest. And given that this is on top of a hill, and it's not downwind from the industry, realistically, this should be the richest part of the town. Very often you see that the part that's downwind from the industry, and I think Fox has an interesting video about this, tend to be the poorest parts of any city, and then anything that is far away from the most polluted air is often the richest part of the town. And especially in this case, we have this section which is also the highest in terms of elevation, and we have this big beautiful forest. I think all of these are factors that factor into this realistically being the most bougie part of the city. So I added all of these little roads with all of their crazy curves and cul-de-sacs through the forest, and zoned little bits and bobs here just to make sure that we get standalone houses that look like they have enormous backyards and stuff like that, just to have that villa neighborhood basically. And then we extended the city a little bit to make sure that it's still under the cover of the big zone. But yeah, that's this part basically, and there it just transitions into a proper forest with some paths that you can walk on, bit of a nature reserve kind of vibe, I suppose. And that's the end of the city. And then over here we have the river, where I'm not really going to be adding too much, but just make sure that the landscape is looking nice and historical and rural enough. Now on the other part of the river, we have this other part of town with the row houses that aren't growing exactly. Gonna be very honest, this is a bit of an issue that I run into because I'm trying to have way too many row houses in this city than, for what the game wants, apparently. But, realistically, most people in the UK live in row houses, and I'm almost gonna repeat myself from a previous video because I already had that rant about density. But there's something about the way that density is connected to demand in the game that's kind of not related to cultures, because most people in the UK live in terraced houses, I should say, even though I just keep calling them row houses. Sorry about that. But it's just that in the game, most people want to live in low-density residential, which counts as detached and semi-detached houses, or actually just detached, I think, which is a bit unfortunate, and it means that I have way too much medium density in this city compared to what the game actually wants me to do. So we have all of these holes in the middle, and I'm gonna have to add a bunch of extra zones to make that grow. So, like I said, about the issue with demand and finishing this city, it could also just be related to how I build in the game, and that it's not really conducive to good zone management in terms of the demand in the game. But yeah, that's what it is. It's hard to do anything about that. But anyway, this part of town is just another slightly older part moving into the rural outskirts of the city. And we also have a park underneath the bridge, because I think the bridge is pretty cool. We have that bridge coming down from the hill, crossing the river, very tall. Would look very cool from a park, I figure. So, I don't know, it seems like in real life, when you have a very large bridge, there's also often a park next to it. And maybe it's just because it looks cool. Maybe it's just because of geography reasons. I think it's something you tend to see in large American cities, or with that bridge in Sydney or stuff like that. But yeah, it works. So I decided to also add that in here. And then we have these main roads here that just kind of follow the foot of the hills. And on both sides of that, I'm adding some residential zones, kind of also following the elevation and trying to add some parts here and there where realistically a creek could maybe make its way down the hill and into the river on the side. So it's a little bit clustered. We don't have very neat straight roads, but I think that's something that's realistic for this kind of area as well. The more you go up these hills and the more you have these newer residential areas going up these hills, the more the roads are also just gonna be geography based instead of, well, whatever else the UK used to come up with their layouts for towns. I'm not actually sure. In the US, of course, it's everything's just straight and it's all just grids. And in the Netherlands, it's very much dictated by traffic ideas about making it hard for cars to just go in a straight line everywhere, and trying to promote cycling and walking and stuff like that. But UK layouts are just another beast, and it's interesting to get a feeling for it and what they kind of look like, but it's still very hard to explain it and put into words what the road layouts of residential districts in the UK are like. It's just that they are kind of typical. They tend to have lots of little curves, maybe not cul-de-sacs, but it's just, yeah, it's almost like you're looking at a brain. That's a very weird comparison, but that's what it kind of makes me feel like. So here we have another section at the end of the city, still trying to make that transition from urban to rural, with a bit of ribbon development here alongside the river and some old roads that I think part of this trying to make this look realistic is also trying to make the layouts of the residential areas follow the layouts of the farm fields that would have been in their place before. And I think I kind of answered my own question here. That probably also influences the strange way that residential neighborhoods are laid out in the UK. Probably a lot down to just the way that the farm fields were shaped before the houses were built. And then there's also all kinds of economics reasons with developers buying up certain plots of land and stuff like that. Yeah, interesting to think about. In the Netherlands, there's this interesting website called, I think it's called Topo Atlas, where you can look back at old maps and I'm sure there are some sources like this for other countries as well. But you can look back at old maps and compare them between different years and now, which is always interesting to see how towns have developed over time. And it's very good inspiration if you ever want to build a city, Skylines Dutch city, to just look at existing cities and see how they've developed over time. I think that goes for any city in the world if you can find some sources on it, really. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time with some new content. Bye bye!